My Experiences While Out of My Body, by Cora Veronica Scott. The release. It was true then. I was suddenly and conclusively liberated from my physical vessel. On this occasion I declared, or rather thought, I shall not be required to return. On numerous, indeed almost countless occasions, I had experienced the sublime consciousness of being absent from my physical form, of consorting with ascended companions in their more elevated state of existence. But, until this hour I had always known that it was only for a brief season and that there was a tie, a vital and psychic tie, binding me to return to my terrestrial form. But now, could it be true? Was I emancipated to live and labor with the beloved, the cherished ones, in this, their higher, more perfect state? The best beloved, those who had preceded me into this wondrous life, gathered about by degrees to welcome me. Not all at once, but first those who were by the tenderest ties the nearest and the dearest. They did not answer my inquiry. Have I truly arrived to remain? The guide, the guardian, took me gently in charge that I might not even contemplate the form I had so recently departed. A profound sense of relief, of being liberated from the constraints of the body, suffused me, far greater than I had ever experienced before. A conviction pervaded me that the entirety of my being was released. It surely seemed that my labors within the human form were completed, that the final word was spoken, the last stroke of the pen executed. Oh, the wonder, the ineffable joy of thus being united with the beloved. Those whom I knew had never perished, but had cast aside their garments of dust for the more exquisite raiment of the Spirit. In an account written for others to peruse one cannot dwell minutely upon the sacred meetings with those who were ever nearest and dearest. Those of the household, related by ties of consanguinity, and those who were kindred in spirit, united to one in thought and aspiration. All that such a reunion portends, more than can be dreamed or imagined whilst one is in the human state, was now my possession. Turn away from all thought of the earth form, declared the one appointed to lead and guide me in this newer, grander flight. One by one, or in groups, the cherished ones of the earth home joined us, welcoming me ever, yet ever evading the frequently recurring inquiry, am I truly here to remain? My attention was perpetually drawn to some group or assembly that had not been beheld by me, always a source of wonder to find them all there. They would smile and seem to reply, yes, all here, in our own particular states, and performing our own appointed work. The vastness of the spirit realm. There was a perception of magnificent light, a consciousness of illumination, an awakening to the vastness, the boundlessness of this realm of spirit. Oh, how frequently, when in dreams or visions I had been permitted and aided by my guides to visit the spiritual states, this inner and higher realm, I had yearned to remain, but ever willing to answer the call of duty, of additional work to be performed by me, I would return to occupy my place at the appointed time. Now, all else was engulfed, eclipsed by the wondrous experiences that came, the beloved presences, the vistas of luminous spirits. This was a state of superconsciousness, the awakening of faculties and perceptions hitherto unknown, of being aware, almost without limitation, of knowing. Whatever is the nature and state of the real ego, this seemed as near to the absolute as one could well conceive. There was so much of me. There was so little of me. There were so many and such transcendent spirits. How one shrinks in the presence of the mighty ones. How one expands in the knowledge of the infinite. His image, Frequently in approaching a transcendent light there would appear an atmosphere of enveloping tints. There would also seem to be a sphere of sound, of surpassing music. On being admitted to that sphere it would prove to be a group of spirits who thus in accord are light and harmony. Where one can enter such an atmosphere communing with such a group, it is because one has need of and is in harmony with the spirits of that group. Senses merged in perception. Objective scenes seemed ever to be accommodations to my state, and would often vanish as I became aware of the minds or spirits suggested by the scenes. All human sensations, as sight and hearing, are readily perceived by one awakening to spiritual states to be but manifestations of consciousness through the physical limitations to which the spirit in its mental states of earth becomes accustomed. But here all is merged in perception, where one perceives and understands. Thus declared the guide. This augmented consciousness uniting or liberating the faculties is not all at once. I found myself thinking in the accustomed channels, in words as well as thoughts, listening for replies instead of knowing that the answer had been communicated to me, indeed was present before I had questioned, of looking for beautiful forms and scenes instead of perceiving the soul of beauty which was everywhere. I became increasingly aware that the whole of me, released from the fetters of the bodily senses, could perceive and receive more perfectly the answer to every question, even before its formulation in thought. Formulation is a process of limitation, sometimes of hindrance, remarked the guide. A feeble comparison of what perception really is may be found in an artist whose prepared mind sees the beauty in a landscape, a sunset sky that another beholds not at all or dimly. Prepared senses are the result of prepared minds, of being pervaded by the awareness of the spirit, observed the presence. It is of little avail, however, to attempt to bring into outward forms of thought and expression the perceptions one is aware of while one is in that inner state, save that they relate to conditions under which those loved and loving ones in that state can reach and alter for the better the sorrowing hearts in human life, the shadowed conditions of earth existence. The body in charge of guardians. After a time I became aware of being led to where the earthly form was still breathing, being cared for and sustained with breath by a beloved guardian spirit and by devoted friends in human life. I was to return after all. It was necessary to keep my spirit en rapport with the body as the psychic cord was not severed that connected body and spirit. But not at once was I to return. These periods of directing my attention to and visiting the body were brief, just enough to keep the vital spark alive, and assist the dear attendants in both worlds to prevent the complete separation which for many days seemed imminent. A vast congregation. It is well known to those who may be interested in reading these pages that during all the years of my mortal life I have been brought before audiences and assemblies of people, many thousands. Among them were hundreds who became friends, some of them lifelong, some of later years. I had known of the transition of very many who had been members of those audiences and of my own flock, but I was not prepared for the vast congregation that came out of their respective groups composing a still greater concourse to meet me, nor was I prepared to realize that I knew most of them as friends on earth. There were those who had heard the utterances of my guides through my lips when I was a child, those who had attended and were my personal friends when I was still in my youth, and those who in later years had been of the audiences in many places, and those of my own beloved congregation. How difficult to realize that they were all gathered into the larger congregation of the skies, each and all unfolding, working in whatever line of knowledge and work was theirs to attain and achieve, and to find all the treasured jewels of friendship more bright in the added luster of the larger life. The flowers in the garden of true affection growing more and more transcendently fair. This is indeed heaven. Next in blessedness to the homes of the best beloved, which are the very kingdom of heaven. Ministrations of spirits. It was sublime to observe the ministrations of spirits to those dwelling in less fortunate states, most notably to those yet bound by earthly forms. Wherever the ties of consanguinity were accompanied by genuine affection, the spirit guardians of the household answered the call, which might manifest merely as a passing thought, a yearning, or a silent prayer for assistance and strength, or indeed as a necessity unrecognized by the recipient of this celestial aid. Within the spiritual realm, time does not constitute a limiting factor. The response to a need, whether expressed as an aspiration or a prayer, is instantaneous. Where there appears to be delay, frequently accompanied by doubt in the minds of those on earth regarding the presence and ministration of the summoned loved one, such obstruction arises from earthly barriers, because those in the mortal state are unable to perceive, and many, alas, are unwilling to receive their spirit friend. I observed that the customary barriers comprise uncontrolled, selfish grief, lamenting the departed while frequently neglecting the other beloved members of the household who remain, seeking communion solely to advance a selfish purpose, and, more generally, the impediment of erroneous education, both theological and materialistic, by which spiritual faculties have been rendered dormant for generations. When human hands and hearts, even when the latter are wrung by anguish, endeavor to assist others in sorrow or adversity, the path is cleared, and these earthly benefactors are themselves aided by the ministering spirits. To mourn a friend as utterly lost when they have merely cast aside the outer vestments of clay is to obstruct, for a time, the avenue of communication and ministration. Long must the spirit helpers labor and wait for humankind to become receptive to their response to the plea for assistance. I beheld so many who were unable to perceive the presence of their loved ones that I repeatedly wished there were more genuine bearers of messages, more to offer consolation to those who grieve. Thereupon the presence responded, "Not all are prepared to whom the messages are presently delivered, nor are those adequately protected who serve as the chosen instruments for bearing these messages. Yet the seed is being sown and shall take root in thousands of lives." Thought forms. I was shown those who existed within the thought forms and environments of their recent human states. These individuals were surrounded by objects familiar to them on earth, which appeared essential to their happiness even in this novel state of existence. These scenes illustrated that our lives, even when bound by mortal flesh, consist largely of mental states. We perceive that which we are accustomed to see, or that which we have trained our intellects or desires to behold, thereby omitting many, and occasionally most, of the beautiful and significant phenomena we might otherwise discern. Those spiritual states that precisely mirror earthly scenes are composed of the thought forms generated by the spirit's own imagination or replication, constituting their perceived reality. I recalled the weaving of a web that I had once observed an industrious spider bring to perfection, only to be subsequently ensnared in its own creation. I wondered whether we, during our mortal existence, and in the states immediately succeeding it, are not frequently the weavers of similar cobwebs. These conceptual webs appeared to emanate from the minds of the spirits fashioning them, ensphering and occasionally overshadowing them. Before these inquiries could fully crystallize within my mind, the answer from the presence came, "No, they are not ensnared by these thought forms. Their creation is merely the consequence of their present condition. To remove the capacity to produce thought forms, to construct one's own environment, would be to extinguish all mental activity. As the spirit unfolds, These thought forms alter and eventually vanish as true perception supersedes the limitations imposed by the senses. Accepting the almost axiomatic premise that our world of existence is of our own making, our spiritual environment and circumstances being the direct consequence of our state of spiritual unfoldment, it became less difficult, even when reverting to the limitations of the physical organism, to comprehend the conditions of existence in the subsequent stage of personal experience beyond the transition erroneously termed death. Spiritual states are as diverse as the individual conditions of those who inhabit them. The degree of knowledge, or the lack thereof, possessed by an individual constitutes their spiritual state, which is to say, their comprehension of spiritual principles. Oh, that one might coin new words or fashion novel modes of comprehension, to articulate more adequately that which is known when one is liberated from the earthly environment. Indeed, this new understanding is the paramount necessity. It must be attained through gradual unfoldment, internal growth, and the all-pervading, illuminating power of the Spirit. Those within the spiritual states who were replicating the familiar scenes of their recent earthly existence were content and indeed exceedingly happy, particularly when the reproduced environments were of a nature that had afforded them comparative happiness during their mortal lives, owing to their ability to render circumstances precisely as they had appeared on earth, quite unaware that this verisimilitude was the product of their own thought forms rather than an inherent or organic property of the spiritual realm. Engrossing and instructive though these observations of spirits weaving their thoughts into desired or necessary forms were, there were many whose reproductions were of a somber cast. These were not voluntarily created, but were the results of the profound impression that the tribulations of earthly experience had engraved upon their consciousness. No single illustration could suffice to represent them. Rather, every state and condition I was capable of perceiving was revealed to me. Time not a factor. Time appears to play no part within the realm of spirits, save in its relation to persons and events in the mortal state with which those spirits maintain a connection. It was, nevertheless, a source of perpetual wonder and astonishment to observe the fluctuating forms and atmospheres in the surroundings of those with whom I was brought into contact. I beheld spirits who, during their earthly lives, had occupied positions of temporal power, conventionally deemed exalted, such as kings or sovereigns, by virtue not of personal merit or achievement, but through the mere accident of birth. These were clad in the thought robes of their former authority, yet closer scrutiny revealed the threadbare and meager nature of these royal vestments, and they were occasionally seen searching for something wherewith to clothe themselves, seeking to conceal the poverty of their attire and environment. Most of those, however, who had occupied positions arising from titles, rank, and caste, seemed possessed of sufficient discernment to realize that these external circumstances are not perpetuated within the spiritual states, unless an individual has become so thoroughly saturated with the belief that titles, wealth, and outward distinctions possess intrinsic value, and that the divine right of kings is indeed a prerogative derived from heaven. The truly great are humble. I beheld many who had been impoverished in worldly goods, or even despised and reviled among men, or executed for their advocacy of an unpopular cause, now luminous with their own spiritual brilliance unconsciously, wearing their sunbright thoughts for robes of royalty. Ah, how exquisite they were, these souls of luminous countenances and radiant hearts! They were perpetually intent upon assisting humanity, whether within the shadowed spiritual realms or in earthly circumstances. One is not permitted to disclose the names by which these souls in their various spiritual states were known upon earth. I beheld many who were recognized as great, distinguished in thought, deed, and word for the enlightenment of their fellow beings. They remained ever humble, as indeed the truly great must always be. None within the spiritual life are outwardly adorned with the honors bestowed upon them or their memory by a dilatory world. The truly exalted are far too absorbed in ameliorating the adverse conditions of both spiritual and mortal existence to pay heed to the praise and pomp of earthly celebrations held in their memory, which are often so belatedly conferred. To be sincerely beloved by an individual, a nation, or the world is indeed a blessed state, and these exalted souls fully comprehend the profound significance of being appreciated and loved. The radiance of the luminary beings, the exalted ones, is undiminished by the splendor of the higher spheres, for they constitute an integral part of that very effulgence. Spirit groups and inspirers, by virtue of spiritual affinities, those possessing kindred thoughts, perceptions, and aspirations are irresistibly drawn toward one another, establishing groups that are neither conventional nor arbitrary. Within these unions, they interchange ideas and objectives, collaborating for the benefit of humanity. I observed them influencing the minds of those still clad in earthly forms whom they were able to reach, at times individually, at others in groups, as prevailing conditions demanded. Thus they influenced the scholar in his study, the inventor in his workshop or laboratory, and the astronomer in his observatory searching for novel worlds, or aboard exploratory vessels sailing toward uncharted lands, directing their influence most particularly upon those striving to resolve the vexed dilemmas of human existence. It was truly a wondrous spectacle to behold every spirit so resolutely intent upon conferring benefits upon their kind, imparting some vital concept, some essential clue or thread of an intricate proposition that would unravel the entire mystery. For immense periods are these inventions and discoveries known within the spiritual realms before an individual is born into mortal life capable of giving them external expression. How exceptionally luminous appeared the spiritual atmospheres encompassing those in earthly life when these celestial presences drew near. Indeed, such lives must ever be radiant with their own intrinsic light, for otherwise the higher beings could neither approach nor inspire them. Mankind is well acquainted with the names of certain individuals currently on earth whose discoveries, inventions, and endeavors have utterly transformed the world. Those ascended souls who assist in advancing these sublime works direct their thoughts toward such individuals in earthly life as are prepared to receive them. Here dwell the thinkers, whose comprehension of universal truths constitutes the source of all power. Ideas born of these truths reach receptive minds and ultimately move the world. We observed and paused amidst assemblies and groups engaged in their customary deliberations, interchanging ideals and preparing to convey increasingly the knowledge in their possession, in accordance with the readiness of receptive minds. Knowledge is imparted by adaptation. All such transmissions of knowledge must occur through adaptation. A spirit is naturally drawn, as is dictated by the very essence of spiritual law, to the individual best prepared to receive their communications. Thus, the subtle law of imparting knowledge through adaptation governs the spiritual realm, constituting the foundation upon which guides, guardian spirits, and all ministering entities are designated. Affection alone determines the identity of one's intimate personal guardians. From spirit to spirit, it was deeply intriguing and enlightening to observe, as I was permitted to do, a multitude of individuals in the mortal state receiving from luminous and illuminating spirits some novel application of science or art, or some fresh presentation of truth. The earthly minds thus impressed do not anxiously question the source of these ideas, nor do they fear that, should the concepts originate from another intellect, they might forfeit their own individuality. Such intellects recognize that truths belong to all conscious minds, and that there exist, in some realm, greater intellects than their own capable of imparting knowledge. Truth is the universal heritage of souls and of intelligence. Blessed is the mind, spirit, or angel that can perceive or receive it from any source whatsoever. Intelligence alone perceives and imparts intelligence. The process of transmitting knowledge from spirit to spirit becomes increasingly fascinating as one advances into a state of heightened awakening and a clearer perception of the profound verities of the spiritual realm. Instruction and formal education exist only in those regions or conditions of the spiritual world where human methodologies and conceptual forms continue to govern the minds of the departed. Love is the supreme illuminator across all realms and worlds. Consequently, the mutual adaptation of the instructor and the student must serve as the fundamental keynote for the reception of all knowledge. One is tempted to elaborate extensively when contrasting the educational processes of the spiritual state with the methods employed on earth. Yet, I must hasten to record these additional experiences while they remain accessible to my outer consciousness from within. For upon re-entering the mundane existence of earth, even though it remains perpetually influenced by those sublime visions, the vividness of the higher state inevitably becomes obscured by the necessary veil imposed by human conditions. There is an answer for every question. Every inquiry I desired to make found an immediate response, even before the desire had fully formulated into thought. I was able to perceive that the answer emanated from my guide, who served as my preceptor through the law of adaptation. I realized that for every genuine aspiration there exists an inevitable answer. Indeed, the response arising from within and above is that which prompts the very aspiration and desire for knowledge. I understood that there exists a resolution for every perceived difficulty. For, in the ultimate analysis, there are no problems, save for states of limited perception. All this, and 1,000-fold more of internal awakening, was bestowed upon me as my capacity to perceive spiritual knowledge expanded. Those who love their fellow beings. I beheld an innumerable multitude, growing ever more radiant and resplendent as I was escorted closer to them. Among their number were individuals of even greater brilliance, possessing, it seemed, a superior scope and spiritual power. I recognized, though not always from personal acquaintance during my earthly life, several of the individuals assembled there, who stood as the focal points of these radiant groups. These were souls who, during their mortal existence, had loved their fellow men and had endeavored, through word and deed, to alleviate the errors and injustices inflicted upon humanity. Their crusades waged with tongue and pen, and their luminous armor of righteousness, were ultimately recognized and appreciated by many minds on earth. One whom I had known since my early childhood approached me, accompanied by a group of his friends and relatives, with whom I was likewise acquainted. He greeted me in the very manner he was accustomed to employ when we both occupied earthly forms. Though advanced in years before departing his mortal frame, he now appeared perpetually youthful, serene, and peaceful, yet remained resolute and vigorous in his advocacy of the brotherhood of man and the ultimate triumph of the spirit over the illusions of human existence within the realms of time and sense. By those familiar with his life and endeavors, he was esteemed as a preeminent and inspiring intellect. To many, he was indeed a prophet of the glorious era to come. How profoundly my spirit was stirred by this reunion with him, his household, and the circle of friends who accompanied him. One question I had frequently pondered, or desired to resolve, was this: had he, the friend with whom I was then conversing, encountered in the spiritual realms that individual in a distant earthly land who had once declared him to be the greatest man America had ever possessed? The author of this remark, addressed to a prominent writer, was likewise a lover of humanity, though the two had never met during their earthly existences. The query was never articulated. Before it could be fully formulated, the response was received. Yes, we have met, and we frequently confer together. In all essential matters pertaining to the supreme realities of existence and the progression of humanity toward perfection through the comprehension of divine truth and love, we are in perfect accord. I then observed, emerging from that noble company, the very individual of whom we had been speaking. Our thoughts of him and our deep appreciation had drawn him to our presence. Long and earnestly they conversed regarding the future state of affairs when the children of earth shall be liberated from the shadows cast by ignorance. I became increasingly aware of the distinct personalities of these illuminated beings, and on more than one occasion, I was astonished to find that individuals who had emerged from such vastly different backgrounds, environments, educations, habits of thought, and, one might suppose, antithetical spiritual states, could reside together in harmony. The guiding presence, perceiving my astonishment, observed, as you are already aware, distinctions of birth, nationality, external rank, and even education do not constitute genuine differences in the realm of the spirit. These are all lovers of their fellow man, devotees of peace achieved through enlightenment and righteousness. Now, as during their earthly tenure, they perpetually strive, through the exchange of lofty ideals, to discover the most efficacious means of assisting others, to dispel the clouds of ignorance overshadowing the minds of those on earth. Even now, there appears within your vision one whose presence here will elicit your astonishment. I beheld a majestic figure and recognized him who, as the leader of a vast ecclesiastical hierarchy, had, in a prayer for peace issued shortly before his departure from his earthly vessel, offered this profound petition: may they remove the causes of war. As a lover of humanity and a champion of peace, he stood in proximity to these luminous beings, many of whom, during their earthly lives, had never acknowledged any ecclesiastical authority. Naturally, I was aware that all such divisions, barriers, and human standards are utterly dismantled or swiftly dissipate within spiritual realms among enlightened intellects. They perceive, as this soul must have perceived, that earthly office, along with all its external symbols and accoutrements, cannot endure in a sphere where the true essence stands fully disclosed, the very nature of the spirit. Every member of this radiant assembly was intent upon influencing, for their ultimate benefit, the minds of those remaining on earth, in order to promote terrestrial peace and universal love. Alas, alas! Those embroiled in active warfare, the conflict presently consuming half of those nations on earth that deem themselves enlightened, cannot be reached until their leaders and sovereigns have imbibed the lessons taught by bitter experience. Thus spoke the presence, and thus had I myself perceived, filled with sorrow at the contemplation of the immense human suffering that must inevitably follow. The shadows of the conflict. Thereupon, I was shown the dense shadow, a terrible obscurity resembling an all-engulfing abyss, the spectacles of the warfare currently devastating the earth. What I beheld, however, appeared to represent the spiritual and mental conditions of rulers and leaders rather than the physical theaters of combat. I observed luminous points where the ministers of mercy were assembling, heedless of nationality or class, to succor the physically wounded and to whisper words of solace to the mortally injured who were transitioning from life. Hovering above the horrific theaters of war, I perceived those of the rank and file of the armies and navies who had been so abruptly severed from their physical forms. Their immediate thoughts turned to the beloved ones from whom they had been precipitately separated upon being ordered to the vanguard. They were assisted in locating these cherished souls. They endeavored, often in vain, to console and assist their beloved. Their own troubled states of mind and anguish over the separation precluded them from ministering effectively to those they loved. They soon realized that such aid could not be of a material nature, that spiritual fortitude and consolation must emanate from spiritual sources, and that if they themselves possessed sufficient spiritual strength, they might influence the minds of others still in human form to assist their cherished ones. It was a sublime spectacle to behold the ministering spirits succoring, comforting, and instructing those who had been so precipitately thrust into the spiritual state. None save those endowed with the divine gift of loving compassion, resembling a Florence Nightingale or a Clara Barton, could so effectively aid those souls thus ruthlessly severed from their mortal bonds and physical frames. It is a dreadful sight indeed. Yet, the spiritual rescuers are present. The celestial Red Cross invariably finds its way to those in need of assistance and guidance. To some degree, soldiers, indeed all who must engage in warfare on land or sea, are better prepared for this abrupt transition than those cast into the spiritual world by the fortuity of shipwreck, other disasters, or volcanic and seismic disturbances. The soldier is conscious that he must confront the possibility, and indeed the probability, of physical demise. Being thus forewarned, he is frequently less astonished and traumatized upon finding himself detached from his physical vessel. Yet, wherever a need arises, the powerful helpers are present. Above every scene of human sacrifice, whether precipitated by cataclysmic natural phenomena, human ignorance and neglect, or the self-serving aggression of war, there they stand, the cherished ones, the strong ones, the saviors of souls. Not all can be immediately assisted to comprehend their newly acquired state. Everything depends upon the degree of spiritual preparedness, which is frequently more profound among the humble and lowly, who follow a path of simple living, simple affection, and simple duty, than among those who possess the more convoluted mental and moral constitutions of leaders. Indeed, one's genuine spiritual advancement dictates the condition of the soul within the spiritual realm. Nor were the obscured and shadowed scenes of earthly existence confined solely to the battlefronts. Occasionally, far deeper shadows lingered amidst scenes of superficial pleasure and mirth, the mocking opulence of wealth, and its antitheses of destitution, squalor, and misery. The toll of human sacrifice is not exclusively paid in the death of the physical frame. There exist spiritual vortices more terrible than the fiery exhalations of a volcano or the yawning chasms of an earthquake. The palace frequently appeared enveloped in denser shadows than the hovel, whereas a dwelling, though but a humble cottage, if illuminated by love, shone forth like a star of brilliant splendor. Spiritual knowledge, the unfoldment of the highest attributes from within, can alone transform the shadowed states of earth into radiance. Every life must be reached, every mind touched and awakened by the Spirit, and the inherent goodness within each soul must be brought to fruition. Turning for respite, from the tempestuous scenes of contending forces, from the gloom of spiritual night, and from those uncertain states resembling a dim twilight, one's spirit invariably turns to the beloved, to the assemblages of affectionate and cherished souls that constitute the home of the spirit. Spiritual rest is found in transition, a temporary respite from witnessing those distressing conditions and the shadows of spiritual states that one cannot immediately ameliorate. Rest does not equate to idleness. Communion, companionship, and collaborative labor for the benefit of those who can be aided. This is true rest. The home group, ever intent on ministering wherever and whenever required, provided the sought-after respite. Such memories of earthly experiences as had been preserved upon the sacred altar flame of genuine affection and familial bonds. Such exchange of ideals and experiences as subsequent years had yielded. Such understanding of the intermingling of spiritual and mortal spheres, and the guardianship and ministration of departed loved ones over those still in physical form, this indeed was rest. Blessed respite, blessed communion. It would seem that one would never willingly relinquish such companionship, nor are we ever truly separated from those we love. Whatever obligations we must discharge for souls in either the spiritual or the mortal realm, those most in harmony with us, our nearest and dearest, remain perpetually by our side, whether we are in or out of the physical body. Our human expressions, and indeed our customary thoughts, appear superficial, fragile, and puerile when we endeavor to depict the sublime realities of the spirit. We are never divided. We can never be absent from our beloved. Yet the shadows of mortal existence, time, sensory perception, and external changes and circumstances weigh heavily upon those who permit their earthly tenement of clay to define the limits of their mental and spiritual heritage. Reunion with lovers of peace. Returning repeatedly to that luminous sphere peopled by those who cherish humanity, there emerged from their midst individuals whom I had previously known, with whom I, as a humble worker, had labored in various causes. On this occasion I recognized a few, most notably 2 or 3 whom I had last beheld during their earthly lives at the Hague Peace Conference. Ah, how clearly we understood then, as clearly indeed as we do now while the conflict rages, that the nations were not collectively, and in truth very few of them, seeking genuine peace or the permanent establishment of a global court of arbitration. Each power was present merely to evaluate the others, almost all of them endeavoring to extract concessions from their counterparts to facilitate their own self-serving future aggressions. Such was the thought conveyed to me by my friend of brilliant intellect and noble heart, who, accompanied by others, approached to greet me, and the beloved lady who had embraced and kissed me upon our parting at The Hague, repeating now that very gesture, remarked, "We meet once more, and here reigns a sweet tranquility, yet, alas, the horrors of the war. As for you, you must return to earth to perform further labors." She then bestowed her blessing upon me with all the devotion her noble soul could offer. My other companion, possessed of a brilliant mind and a facile pen, whose spirit was fully awakened and illumined, observed, "Indeed, you shall return to earth for additional labors. We shall assist you, for we must all aid those who strive to enlighten the minds and awaken the spirits of those entombed in earthly materialism. How obtuse we remain until we are awakened. When sorrow strikes, the reservoirs of the soul pour forth. Only then can our spiritual guardians render aid, and our understanding begins." Such was my own experience upon earth. I now perceive how meager my knowledge truly was, yet I am profoundly grateful that I was not an absolute stranger to this spiritual realm, and an eternity lies before us in which to expand our understanding. Messages from friends. From those whom I encountered within their abodes of peace, love, and industry, I received numerous messages to be delivered in person to their cherished ones on earth. Communications that may be of interest here as evidence that genuine affection and personal vigilance are far more actively manifested from the spiritual side of existence than humanity realizes. Indeed, even those accustomed to spiritual communion and ministration do not fully comprehend the profundity of this proximity. These messages, however, are far too intimate and sacred to be disclosed herein. They breathe the intense fervor of the true life and love of the Spirit. I shall, in due course, convey them directly to the recipients for whom they were intended. The spirit home of the children. Yet, oh, the children! The children! What can one write or say? What words, whether spoken or penned, can convey an adequate conception of those spheres wherein my spirit has so frequently encountered these darlings of both worlds? My own infant daughter, who departed this life many years ago and has since attained womanhood within the spiritual state, has remained my constant companion, serving as a guardian spirit during the active hours of my earthly life, and acting as a pilot and gentle guide whenever, through sleep or trance, my spirit was liberated to join her and visit the realm of the children. These little ones are frequently more profoundly versed in spiritual knowledge than mortals of mature years. Blessings invariably attend the presence of an infant within a loving earthly home. And, in the loftiest sense, doubly blessed are they who, having once possessed such a treasure, know that though the child may vanish from mortal sight, the treasure remains theirs, a babe growing amidst the blossoms of the celestial gardens, existing as a light within a light, a joy ensphered in joy. Such a child becomes a sacred guardian unto the household. It was indeed an enchanted realm that we now entered. Although I had visited it many times over the course of many years, it appeared on this occasion far more real, more beautiful, and more perfect. As far as the eye could reach, as vast as the intellect could comprehend or conceive, there were children everywhere. They sported in the light of their own brilliance and joy, like embodied sunbeams weaving rainbow-tinted thoughts into forms of exquisite beauty. Flowers bloomed everywhere. The melodies of birds and the sweet cadence of children's voices mingled with the murmur of cascading waters amid scenes of the rarest beauty. Ah, the spiritual realm of childhood, the playgrounds of the skies. Not only children, but those of larger growth, parents, preceptors, and friends, were present to instruct, to assist, and to increase in knowledge and usefulness. Indeed, on occasion, the children themselves act as teachers to those of more advanced earthly years. Isles of light, radiant with blossoms and lush verdure, were encircled by iridescent waters. Could any mortal ever depict the exquisite thought forms of these lovely beings? Let us create rainbows, exclaimed one ethereal child among a group of playmates, several of whom were newcomers to that realm. A look of inquiry appeared in the eyes of her companions. How can we create rainbows? A child teacher drew near and replied, I shall show you. Follow me. The 5 or 6 eagerly responded. Clasp hands, the teacher instructed, and harbor no fear, for there can be no rainbows without both clouds and light. I was permitted to follow, with my spiritual vision, as the teacher led them far away from those enchanting scenes to a region where clouds and shadows hung dark beneath and around them. They had drawn near a vast metropolis of the earth. Oh, let us not venture here, pleaded one. It appears so dark. Yet the others urged her forward. Presently a little boy among them remarked, "Look, there is a little girl. She is cold and weeping in the street. She is hungry as well. Let us assist her." They approached, and the child, feeling a sudden sense of comfort, sobbed more softly and prayed, "Oh, my mother in heaven, can you hear me and send aid to my brother and the baby, you who loved us so?" Thereupon the spirit children perceived a man approaching. They gently but firmly guided him toward the weeping child, to whom he spoke kindly, asking, "What is the matter, my little girl?" "Oh, sir, my mother is dead, my brother is ill, and the baby has nothing to eat. We are so cold in our room. Can you take me there?" The man inquired, extending his hand for her to lead him. She clasped two of his fingers with her tiny hand and guided him through the gloomy streets to a narrow alley and up some dark, creaking stairs. Indeed, there was her little brother, crying for his mother and sister, and the infant, asleep but sobbing. The benevolent man comprehended the situation at a glance. "Do not weep, my little man. I shall return in a few minutes. Guard them well, little lady, until I come." The spirit children had labored unceasingly. They observed the spirit mother, her countenance filled with sorrow, bending over the infant and then over the little brother. They, too, endeavored to comfort him and assist the little girl. They watched the man go to a telephone to speak with someone, and they could perceive and feel the luminous aura of kindness in which he spoke and in which the replies were received. How expeditious he was! He quickly located a place to purchase provisions. Returning shortly, he kindled a fire, warmed some milk, and gave the other children nourishment to alleviate the sharpest pangs of hunger. Presently, a woman arrived, one of exceedingly kind heart, who also worked with great dispatch. She administered milk-prepared food to the infant, tended to the sick boy, who required physical comfort above all else, and soothed and fed the little girl, who, acting as a miniature mother, immediately assisted in caring for the baby. How diligently the spirit children labored as well. They had prompted the man to notice and hear the little girl, assisted in guiding them to the dismal room they called home, aided him in locating both the telephone and the place to purchase food, guided the benevolent woman to the dwelling, and helped care for the children, comforting them and the spirit mother alike. Now, the teacher said, "We shall return to our beautiful abode." One little boy whispered to the teacher, "I know there are more children and people who require assistance down there. May we return to help them? Whenever you desire to create rainbows, flowers, or other beautiful things, we shall go," she replied. And they rejoiced. Lo! As they traversed the encompassing clouds, arches of rainbows spanned above them, and radiant paths of light guided them back to their spiritual home. When the other children beheld their approach, they sang, "Oh, the rainbows! Oh, the rainbows! When you dry the tears of sorrow and succor those in need, you create rainbows." All spirit children are instructed to visit the scenes of earthly life. The homes and loved ones who mourn their absence invariably attract them, and they are taught to minister, to assist, and to guard. If they possessed no home on earth, they strive to aid those who still linger within the orphaned realms of human existence. There are no orphans in the spirit realm. Mothers whose own infants remain in the earthly life assist in caring for those little waifs untimely cast out of human existence, and for spirit children who yearn for maternal love. Children whose parents still dwell on earth are taught to assist and comfort those within the home, as well as those who possess no home at all. Particularly cherished are those young waifs who found no welcome within their earthly vessels, including those who never beheld the light of mortal day. Nor did they descend solely from the impoverished of the earth, particularly those abandoned by unfortunate or misguided mothers. All of these are nurtured by spirits whose hearts overflow with maternal devotion. It is worthy of note that not all who bear children on earth are true parents, while many who remain childless labor unceasingly within earthly asylums to rescue some neglected, forsaken child. These indeed are the true parents. What greater chastisement could exist than when a mortal mother, having rejected the sacred gift of maternity, is greeted upon her transition into the spirit realm by the very infant she neglected, offering her welcome. Truly, these are coals of fire upon her head. It is not solely to witness scenes of grief and deprivation that these spirit children are guided back to earth, to homes, schools, playgrounds, and lyceums where earthly youth receive instruction, to venues of recreation and amusement where they play, sing, and flourish. There, too, do their companions from the spirit realm mingle with them, striving to inspire them with thoughts and deeds of loving kindness and a perception of beauty. Upon returning to the realm of spirit children, one encounters such respite from worldly care, such enduring sources of felicity, and such exquisite creation of beautiful forms. Would that all humanity might comprehend this. Indeed, knowledge of these matters has reached but few on earth. Yet human minds shall increasingly be imbued with the wisdom and methods of the heavens. Those who have introduced innovative educational methodologies to the inhabitants of earth have been inspired, in some measure, by these instructors in the spiritual spheres. Froebel, whose kindergarten system was designed for children of all ages, and A. J. Davis, whose progressive lyceum system was never intended solely for the Sunday instruction of youth, but was, in its inception, a reproduction of the pedagogy employed in the spirit realm. Yet, even if one were capable of translating the spiritual modes of instruction into human tongue, the law of adaptation that governs the higher spheres might not always be applicable to mortal life. How exquisite it is to contemplate that growth, and the most favorable opportunities for the highest spiritual unfoldment, guided by the most affectionate teachers and guardians, encompasses those beloved ones who have departed from their earthly homes. Hear, then, O mortal parents, sisters, and brothers, you who mourn the physical absence of the one who once occupied the vacant chair, you who bear the profound ache of your beloved children's departure, here they reside. Conveying to your very hearths and hearts, did you but perceive it, the love, the knowledge, the wisdom, and the beauty of the heavens. Beauty and harmony. From my earliest childhood throughout my earthly existence, magnificent scenery, the delicate hues of earth and sky, music, and indeed all beautiful sights and sounds exerted a profound influence upon me. In the spiritual spheres, I observed that harmonious colors, splendid vistas, and often exquisite melodies greeted me as we drew nigh to radiant atmospheres surrounding spheres of light. These were harmonies of such sublime beauty that one might imagine them to be the music of the spheres. Upon closer approach, I perceived that these hues and sounds, as they reached my consciousness, were the very radiations of thought, the spiritual activities of those souls who, dwelling within these spheres, had achieved true harmony. They were not merely creating beautiful colors and music, but living them. The artists. Perhaps I have noted elsewhere that in the spiritual realms, music does not always accompany those who were musicians on earth. Similarly, harmony of color and beautiful surroundings may envelop those who never aspired to be artists in their mortal lives. Their existences have instead been interwoven with sweet, benevolent thoughts and deeds. A circumstance that would have occasioned great astonishment, had I not been previously aware of it, was that artists, painters, sculptors. Do you want access to this and all the complete audiobooks on the channel, plus the ebook version? Click the link in the description or scan the QR code in the left corner of the screen to access our library, where you can listen to your favorite esoteric books without ad interruptions, lock your screen, or use other apps while the narration plays, and even download the ebook version to follow along as you listen. Listen on your computer via web browser, or download the app from the Play Store. After subscribing, you will receive an email with your login details, password, and step-by-step instructions on how to access the books through the Hotmart app.